Breana Rouhselang grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing much ever seemed to happen. The streets were lined with rows of modest homes, each with well-kept lawns and bicycles leaning against porches. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other every morning, and where the biggest concern was whether the local football team would win its next game. For those who lived there, life moved slowly, safely, and without surprises. Breana seemed to embody the spirit of that calm environment. She was well liked by her classmates, known for her easy smile and her natural energy that drew people toward her. She played sports, helped out at community events, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had her whole future ahead of her. To most people, she looked like the kind of teenager who had everything going right, but there was more to Breana than what the world saw. Like any teenager, she carried dreams that stretched far beyond the borders of her small town. She wanted to travel, to experience life in ways her quiet neighborhood could never offer. She often imagined herself years ahead, living in a bigger city, surrounded by possibilities. Those who knew her closely could sense her restlessness, though she never openly admitted it. On the surface, she seemed grounded and content, but inside she was filled with questions about where she truly belonged and who she could trust. The town itself seemed to magnify these feelings. Its calmness could be comforting, but it could also feel suffocating. Secrets in such places do not stay hidden for long. Gossip moved quickly, whispered through school hallways, and repeated in hushed tones at grocery stores. Breana was not exempt from this, essays. Her friendships, relationships, and personal struggles became part of the quiet talk that floated around her community. While she smiled for everyone else, she carried the weight of those whispers quietly, determined not to let anyone see her vulnerability. What made Breana stand out, though, was her resilience. She refused to let the darker parts of her life define her. Even when she faced conflicts, she presented herself as strong as though she could handle anything. It was this combination of openness and mystery that made people drawn to her. She was the kind of girl others admired, the kind people rooted for without always knowing why. And yet, that very quality also placed her in situations where trust was fragile. Those who wanted to be close to her did not always have good intentions. The neighborhood that raised Breana seemed safe, almost untouched by tragedy. It was the kind of place where parents felt secure letting their children walk home after dark, and where the idea of violence seemed unimaginable. But beneath that quiet surface, lives were intertwined in complicated ways. Relationships grew intense, rivalries formed silently, and emotions were left unchecked. Breana was caught in that web, often unaware of just how much others were watching her, following her, and building their own perceptions of who she was. To outsiders, her story might have seemed like one of promise and innocence, but the truth was far more fragile. The picture-perfect image of a teenager enjoying her youth in a peaceful town was only part of the reality. Breana's life was filled with both light and shadow, and while the world only noticed her laughter and energy, hidden struggles and unseen dangers slowly crept closer. No one could have guessed that this bright, hopeful girl, growing up in such an ordinary place, would soon be at the center of a tragedy that would haunt her town forever. The night that changed everything began like so many others. The air was cold, the streets were dimly lit by scattered lamps, and the suburban calm carried an almost eerie stillness. Breana had told her family she would be out only for a little while. There was nothing unusual about her leaving. She had often gone to meet friends or attend events. The neighborhood was considered safe, the kind of place where danger was thought to exist only on television screens or in distant cities. Her absence in those first few hours did not raise alarm. But as the night stretched on and Breana failed to return, unease began to grow in the household. Her phone went unanswered, and messages left unseen. What began as small concern quickly turned into panic. Her family contacted friends, hoping someone had seen her or heard from her. The responses were all the same. Nobody knew where she was. By morning, the reality could no longer be ignored. A missing person report was filed, and the quiet town was thrown into a state of confusion. How could someone vanish without a trace in a place so ordinary? So familiar. It did not seem possible. Police wasted no time in beginning their search. They retraced her last known steps, speaking with neighbors and combing the streets she was believed to have walked. Volunteers joined the effort, gathering in groups to search wooded areas, backyards, and abandoned lots. Flyers with Breana's photo were printed and distributed, her smiling face now haunting every storefront and lamppost. The community came together, but beneath their determination was a rising fear. The thought that something sinister could have happened in their midst unsettled them all. As hours turned into days, theories began to circulate. Some believed she had run away, overwhelmed by the pressures of teenage life. Others whispered about darker possibilities, unwilling to say them aloud but unable to silence the thought. Detectives refused to dismiss any angle. They gathered her digital records, scrolled through her social media, and examined every text and call. Patterns began to emerge, but none that offered immediate answers. The search, though relentless, felt as though it was leading into a maze. Every missing case has a turning point, and with Breana, it came suddenly. A search team scouring an area near the edge of town reported something unusual, a trail of disturbed snow leading into a patch of woods. It was subtle, easily overlooked, but to trained eyes it was enough to warrant investigation. Officers marked the path and pressed forward. What they would find would confirm the community's worst fears. Before that discovery was announced, the town lingered in a strange state of hope and dread. Families locked their doors earlier than usual, parents held their children a little closer, and students whispered in classrooms about what might have happened. The sense of safety that once defined the neighborhood was slipping away. People who had once believed they were untouchable to tragedy now waited in silence, bracing themselves for the moment when hope would give way to something much darker. The woods on the edge of town were not far from where families walked their dogs or where children cut through on their way to school. To most, it was an ordinary patch of trees, familiar and harmless, but on that cold morning, the search team noticed something that felt out of place. The snow had been disturbed, pressed down by hurried footsteps that seemed to vanish into the trees. At first glance, it could have been nothing, just the tracks of an animal or perhaps a passerby. Yet something about the uneven pattern suggested a struggle. Investigators followed the trail cautiously, their breaths heavy in the frozen air, their eyes scanning every corner of the frost-covered ground. Not far into the woods, they stumbled upon a sight that stopped them in their tracks. A shallow, uneven mound of snow and leaves had been hastily arranged, as though someone wanted to hide something but did not have the time or the care to do it properly. When officers cleared away the covering, the truth revealed itself. Beneath the thin layer lay Breana's body. She was no longer the smiling, energetic teenager the community remembered. Her life had been violently taken, and the evidence left behind spoke of rage rather than accident. The scene was grim and heavy with silence. Officers worked methodically, documenting every detail, aware that the smallest clue could unlock the mystery of what had happened. The position of her body, the clothing she wore, and the marks left on her skin told a story more disturbing than anyone had imagined. This was not the act of a random attacker passing through town. It was personal, deliberate, and done with alarming brutality. News of the discovery spread quickly. The town that had been clinging to hope now collapsed into grief and fear. Candlelight vigils were planned almost immediately, but behind the prayers and tears lingered another emotion: anger. How could this happen here? Who could have harbored so much hatred toward a girl who had seemed to radiate kindness? Parents began to question whether they truly knew the people around them. Friends replayed their last conversations with Breana, searching for signs they had missed. The discovery in the woods did more than take a life. It shattered an illusion of safety that the town had held for decades. For investigators, the task became clearer yet far more difficult. They were no longer searching for a missing person. They were pursuing a murderer. Every piece of evidence was carefully bagged and taken for analysis. Detectives photographed the area, noting footprints, broken branches, and impressions in the snow that suggested more than one person had been present. The woods themselves had become a crime scene transformed from a quiet refuge into a place of horror. The brutality of the crime pointed to someone close to Breana, someone who knew her routines and felt a powerful surge of emotion strong enough to end her life. Strangers did not leave scenes so raw and unplanned. The killer had likely walked those same suburban streets, perhaps even joined the search, blending into the crowd while quietly carrying a terrible secret. The discovery of her body was not just the end of the search. It was the beginning of an investigation that would unravel friendships, expose hidden lives, and force the town to face the darkest truths lurking just beneath its calm surface. Detectives turned their focus immediately toward the people who had been closest to Breana. In crimes like this, the circle of suspects rarely stretches far beyond those who knew the victim well. And they began with her friends, teammates, and classmates, carefully piecing together a picture of her final days. The interviews revealed a mix of admiration, jealousy, and hidden tension. Breana was well liked, but she was not without conflict. Popularity often came at a cost, and beneath the surface of smiling group photos were rivalries that had been quietly simmering. Investigators dug deeper into her digital life. Her phone records revealed late-night conversations, unanswered messages, and a few heated exchanges that hinted at disagreements she had kept private. Social media painted an image of a girl surrounded by friends, but behind the curated posts were connections that told a more complicated story. Certain names began appearing again and again in the accounts of her final hours, people whose alibis seemed uncertain or whose explanations did not fully align. One individual in particular drew attention. They had been close to Breana, perhaps closer than most knew, and there were signs of strain in their relationship. The evidence hinted at jealousy, an intensity that had shifted from affection to resentment. Detectives noticed inconsistencies in this person's story, subtle contradictions between what they said and what others reported. While nothing yet proved guilt, the suspicion was enough to make them the prime focus. Meanwhile, the community struggled with the knowledge that the killer was almost certainly one of their own. Parents who once trusted their children's friends now eyed them with caution. Neighbors who had shared block parties and backyard barbecues whispered about one another behind closed doors. The illusion of suburban harmony was cracking. Every family wondered if someone they knew was hiding a terrible secret. Forensic results began to strengthen the case. Items found near the crime scene matched belongings linked to the suspect. A set of footprints in the snow corresponded to shoes seen in recent photographs of them. Even digital timestamps placed them dangerously close to the scene at the time Breana disappeared. Each new piece of evidence tightened the net. Detectives also noticed a pattern in the suspect's behavior following Breana's disappearance. While others were frantic, volunteering in search efforts or posting online appeals, this individual had remained distant, quiet, and at times oddly detached. Their silence, once dismissed as shock, now appeared calculated. It was as if they were watching events unfold, waiting to see how much the police would uncover. The case was beginning to take shape, but questions remained. What was the true motive? Why had a relationship that once seemed so normal spiraled into something deadly? Detectives believe the answers lay in a mix of obsession and betrayal, emotions that had been hidden beneath the surface for far too long. Breana's death was no random act. It was personal, fueled by feelings that had grown unchecked until they erupted into violence. The investigation was moving closer to its conclusion, but the full truth, when revealed, would be even darker than anyone had imagined. The arrest came quietly, without the drama of flashing sirens or a late-night chase. Detectives moved in once the evidence became too strong to ignore. The suspect, a familiar face in Breana's life, was led away in handcuffs while neighbors watched in disbelief. This was not the shadowy stranger many had feared, but someone who had sat at the same school cafeteria tables, who had walked the same suburban streets, and who had once been considered trustworthy. This shock was immediate and devastating. The idea that such violence could come from within the community was harder to accept than the crime itself. In court documents that later became public, the story of what led to Breana's death unfolded. The suspect had struggled with jealousy and resentment, feelings that had intensified over weeks and months until they boiled over. Investigators revealed chilling details. The meeting arranged under the cover of night, the confrontation that escalated, and the deliberate decision to silence her forever. There was no accident, no moment of panic to explain away the violence. It was premeditated, planned with cold determination, and carried out with a cruelty that stunned even seasoned investigators. The trial was a painful spectacle for the town. Families who had once shared bleachers at school events now sat divided in the courtroom. On one side were those mourning the loss of Breana, her friends wearing her favorite colors and clutching photos as reminders of the girl they had loved. On the other side sat the family of the accused, equally shattered, struggling to reconcile the child they had raised with the monster described in testimony. Each day of the proceedings brought new revelations, painting a picture of obsession, betrayal, and calculated rage. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision, presenting digital messages, witness accounts, and forensic evidence that tied the suspect directly to the crime scene. The defense attempted to argue diminished responsibility, suggesting emotional turmoil had clouded judgment, but the weight of the evidence was too great. Jurors listened in silence as every detail of Breana's final moments was recounted, the atmosphere heavy with grief and disbelief. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its breath, guilty on all counts. The suspect showed little reaction, a blank expression masking whatever emotions might have remained beneath the surface. For Breana's family, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but no sentence could bring her back. The life that had been stolen was gone forever, leaving behind only memories and the hollow comfort of accountability. In the aftermath, the town tried to piece itself back together. Vigils were held, scholarships were created in Breana's name, and murals appeared on school walls to honor her memory. Yet beneath the gestures of remembrance, the community carried scars that would never fully heal. Parents no longer assumed safety simply because they lived in a quiet suburb. Teenagers walked their streets with a new sense of caution. Trust once taken for granted became something fragile. Breana's story became a warning, a reminder that evil does not always come from strangers or dark alleys. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, wearing the face of someone familiar, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. The murder of Breana Rouhselang left a wound not just on her family but on an entire community, a wound that time could never truly close. Her name would live on, not only as a victim but as a symbol of the hidden dangers that can lurk behind the ordinary facades of everyday life.